I used to teach on a course, and one of the subjects I taught on was valuing the Word of God. And one revelation I had a couple of years ago back was, we all, well, I don't know whether the order, I shouldn't assume, but the longest book of the Bible, or the longest chapter of the Bible, Psalm 119. It's a love poem. Do you know what the love poem is about? It's a love poem about the Word of God. Almost every single verse mentions the Word of God. Just shows you the Bible is telling you that the Word of God is so valuable. Meditate on it, sing it, learn it, memorize it, read it, share it. And that's what we want to do. So Steve and I have agreed that we're going to do a series on the Gospel of Mark. And we're going to see how it carries us. I tried to lay out a plan for Steve, but he said, let's do it chapter by chapter. But if God tells us more things, let's just keep going. And I thought, that's fair enough. The thing is, the more you dig deep, the more you can find. I mean, I'm sure that Martin Lloyd, what's his face, would have probably preached on every single verse 1 week at a time, and you'd have been here for about an hour. But the point is that God's always got words to bring us. So we're going to talk about Mark, and I've been tasked with bringing an introduction, trying to bring you an overview of Mark. What's Mark about? And I found that quite challenging, to be honest. Debbie knows that I've been expressing my concern about what I'm going to say to you, because I don't want it to become just one boring 30-minute lecture from Keith on This is Mark. And the other thing I found very difficult is I've been reading various books, and some of them really are, they don't get my juices going, let's put it that way. And maybe that's because we don't know a huge amount about Mark, or we sort of do, but we don't. So I'm going to take a few liberties here. And I'm going to acknowledge that I've used a lot of David Paulson in helping pull this together. Because I've warned to him ever since Debbie and I heard him explain the covenants of the Bible and how many different covenants there are, which is not for today. But it just made me open my eyes to the fact that so many people dismiss the Old Bible. I'm going to say this, so many people dismiss the Old Testament because it says the Old Covenant doesn't apply to Jesus forever. And that is a lie. Because there are so many covenants in the Old Testament, and you need to know your Old Testament. Because everything points to Jesus. So Mark, well, let's start with some context first. Well, what is the Bible? A library of books, I guess. Some people have explained it as being a love letter from God to us. Though I have to say, if I got some of those chapters from Debbie, I would have some questions the way she loved me. You know, some of the chapters really are something. Yeah, thanks for that. But the Bible is, but it is. If you think of it as like a love letter, because it's something that Father God has written for you to read and understand and get to know Him and Jesus better. So read them. When I used to get letters from Debbie, I used to read them, and often you'd read them again and again. You might even find that they might be in a little tin somewhere, or I might have burnt them. You never know. But the point is that you cherished it. So why not cherish the Bible? It's the love letter from God. And yes, some things are just so easy. You know, some things go down so well. It's like a glass of milk, or a nice ice cold drink on a warm summer's day. It goes down really well. And yes, some things are like eating a piece of old mutton, and you have to have a really good chew on it because it's really quite hard to digest, and you really have to work your way through it. But that's the important thing to do with the Bible is critique it and chew on it and have a think and learn about it. That's the important thing. And not be afraid of it. There are difficult passages, but they can make some sense. And I can't say they know everything, but it's sometimes I wonder, how big is your God? Are you limiting the Bible because of your limited view of God? Or are you prepared to expand your view of God to fit the Bible? Or vice versa, how they look at it. But anyway, what is a gospel? Well, a gospel is not a biography. It's not a history. It's more like a news bulletin. It's almost like a letter, a newspaper that's to be read aloud, to be pronounced, like a newspaper, like a 6 o'clock news, 10 o'clock news, whatever. And it all brings about, it all comes through the unique personality. It's unique to the person who wrote it. So, and that is what Mark is. The Gospel of Mark is one of these Gospels, telling us the good news and telling us the story. So, why have we got four? Why have we got four Gospels? Let's put this in context. Why four Gospels? Well, I'm sure you recognise both these people. Both these people died this week. I think most of us know Dale Winton. Not sure how to pronounce the name of the other one. Beryl, do you know? He's a favourite DJ. It's DJ Avicii, a 28-year-old guy who died on Friday, who apparently was the young people know, so just thought I'd throw something that most of you will have no idea who that is. But I just threw it in. The point being, while I'm talking about dead people, when a famous person dies, you get the newspapers, they all get very excited about what happens when a person dies. And the first thing that often happens is they first of all tell you what the person did. Everyone goes on and on and on about what the person did, which is fine, What do they first talk about Dale Winton on Monday, Tuesday? Well, he did supermarket sweep. Hey, pets win prizes. So this is what Dale Winton did. But as people start thinking about it and dwelling on it, particularly depending on the individual, they'll start asking themselves, well, what did the person say? What did they talk about? And then further on, as time passes by, people ask themselves, well, what was he? What made him tick? What was his motivation? Why did he do what he did? And this is very much what the Gospels are like. So, I did a little table just to bring out some thoughts. See, Mark very much talked about what did Jesus do. Very much an action man. It was punchy. It just goes from boom, boom, boom. He did this, he did that, and he did that. He was in a boat, and then immediately was the other side, and then he was immediately healing people. He was all over the place. He was banging it out. Didn't really worry about what he said. Matthew and Luke, however, who timetable-wise seem to come later, they were more worried about what did he say. What did Jesus say? So Matthew talked more about, well, what did Jesus say in terms of preaching? What did Jesus preach about? Luke, on the other hand, was saying, well, what did he say in his parables? So he talked a little about what Jesus said in parable term. So you've got Mark, then you have Matthew and Luke, both of whom seem to draw quite a bit from Mark. And then, of course, you have John, and John goes off down his own little road and starts asking the question, well, who was he? What was the purpose of Jesus? Or who is he? I kept putting is because people kept saying was, and then we're still alive. So each had a different message and wanted to convey something different. So we're getting from this, we're getting a picture of this is what he did, this is what he said, and this is who he, this is what he is. So we get this lovely picture, four-dimensional pictures of Jesus. Each brings their own unique flavour, their own unique perspective, but together you get the richness of the tapestry of who Jesus is. And each look to convey different aspects of who Jesus was, or is. So, we got Matthew, he was more focused on Jesus being the King of the Jews. Whereas, this is interesting, it's open to interpretation. This is why I'm a little bit fluid on this, because as I studied this, I found, some things people seem to have different ideas, and I guess that's the beauty of studying the Bible. But, Mark seemed to focus on the Son of Man. Jesus is the Son of Man. Luke, Jesus is the Saviour of the world. And John, Jesus is the Son of God. So you get all these different aspects of who Jesus is. And the lovely thing is none of them ever talk about, this is the gospel about Mark talking about Jesus. This is the gospel about Matthew talking about Jesus. This is the gospel of Jesus, and we don't really know much about the writers. They don't bring attention to themselves because their sole purpose is to focus on who Jesus is. Apparently, I was hearing that apparently there's 250 different names and titles for Jesus. Pat will know more. But most people will probably maybe come up with about 30 or 40, but there's a challenge for you. So if you think about where was their focus, their timing? What were they talking about Jesus? Well, what was the reader's perspective? Well, who were they trying to aim the writing at? And this is where they come into two quite interesting categories, because some of the Gospels were more focused towards the non-believer, and some of them were focused towards the believer. So Matthew was very much looking at discipling, how to be a disciple. So it's for young believers, people who are just coming to the faith. It was learning to be discipled, learn to grow as a Christian. John, on the other hand, was very focused at the older believer. I mean, he wrote, "But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you have a life in his name." It was more like the older Christian, learning to persevere, to keep going, run that race, take off that hat again and go for it. Whereas Mark and Luke were much more into the unbeliever. Mark, boom, come on, exciting, have faith in Jesus. This is really exciting stuff. Look what he did. He did this, he did this, he did this. And then Luke was more focused on the Gentiles, being a Gentile himself, was trying to get the Gentiles to come. So I thought that was quite interesting, because often in my old days, you often used to give the Gospel of John as an outreach tool to non-Christians. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not condemning that. Maybe they were waiting for people to get to John 3:16 and then all become Christian. But sometimes you wonder, well, maybe it's better if you gave them something like Mark, so they can really just get into what did Jesus do? What did he do? Why did he do this? And then get bang in on Luke, giving us a little bit more about what he said. So Mark is, in context, Mark is quite interesting. Oh, I just put this little one on the bottom. I found this. The most common phrases or words in those Gospels. So Matthew often talks about the King of Heaven. The King of Heaven is like this. The King of Heaven is like this, or it's like this. Jesus said. Mark was immediately they got in the boat, and immediately they got to the other side, and immediately he did this. I mean, I know this is kind of loose because it depends which version you use. I suppose if you use the Message, it might be something completely different. Luke was very much about the Son of Man, and John was very much about believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. Everyone who believes in him. It's just flavours. I'm trying to just give you a kind of picture. Don't take me as gospel. By all means, challenging and study itself. But this is what we're doing. I'm trying to lay the foundation just to give you a flavour of the Gospel of Mark, so that as Steve and I go through this over a few weeks, you've got a little bit of idea who Mark is. But who was Mark? Who was Mark? What do we know about Mark? I've been a bit naughty on this, but don't worry. Please forgive me. Mark had a Latin name, Marcus, and I discern that means Mark. And I sometimes wonder, could that be because, although he was living in Jerusalem, or in Israel, should I say, I noticed when we used to watch Time Team, sometimes you'd go to, they'd do some digs and find some Roman remains. That one, not Killeen, the other one, Caerwent, I think it is, in South Wales. An amazing place. And what they found was, of course, the Romans moved in, but a lot of the tribe leaders took on the Roman lifestyle. So they were Welsh and Roman. And I started thinking, is this what we've got? Have we got Mark? He was in a good family where they kind of were pseudo-Roman because they had the word name Marcus. But also he had a Hebrew name, Johannan, or John, which means Yahweh has shown grace. So he was often known as John Mark. So that was kind of interesting. The other one, which I have to say I couldn't find a lot to back this up, but some people say his name was Colobobdactylus, which actually was a nickname. I thought it was a dinosaur. But apparently it means stubby fingers. So this poor little kid was born, and they went, yay, stubby fingers, come over here, give us a hand. So stubby fingered John Mark. So from now on it's the Gospel of stubby fingered John Mark, okay? But it's quite interesting though, because if that's true, if that's true, he had a Greek name, a Greek nickname, he had a Latin name, or a Roman name, and he had a Hebrew name. And of course, when Jesus died, it said above the cross, he was King of the Jews, and it said it in Greek, it said it in Latin, and it said it in Hebrew, because he was going to be the king of the philosophical, he was the king of the religious, and he was the king of else do we know about Mark? See, there's some interesting verses in Mark. I know some of you know this, but this tickled me, so I have to bring this in. You see, when you look at the Gospels, you can put them all alongside each other, particularly the three, Matthew, Mark and Luke, which are called the Synoptic Gospels. I had to do that for my RE O-level. And then you have John. And you can have a look, particularly Matthew, Mark and Luke, and you can see where this passage in that one and this passage in that one, you can kind of colour them across. And almost all of Mark is taken into Matthew and Luke, so that's why people have concluded that Mark came first. And as for dating, well, that seems to be open to debate, so I kind of left that one alone. Some people seem to think it's 50 years after AD 50, some think it'd be AD 60, and lots of people have their debates, and it's the sort of thing that scholars seem to enjoy having arguments about, and I don't think it really matters. One thing that did occur to me though, because I've been studying Islam for the last 6 months, and one thing that struck me was, you sit there, and I don't know how comfortable you feel, but whether Mark was written in AD 50 or AD 60, 67, whatever, so maybe between 10 to 30 years after Jesus died, it's still within the living memory of the people who met and lived and walked with Jesus.
Yeah.
In Islam, just as an aside, the first written versions of the Quran came about 200 years, or the ones available came 200 years after Muhammad died. And even then, the versions now don't necessarily agree with the versions that were there because of the way the Aramaic works. Arabic. So it's quite interesting. So, the integrity of the Bible, just by those dates, just shows you that this was, if you can't cope with the idea that people were prepared who knew Jesus had died for him and put their lives on the line proclaiming the gospel that Jesus died for their sins, he was crucified and he rose again, well then there's still integrity in the books themselves. But in Mark there are 1 or 2 verses that don't appear in any other of the Gospels. So you have to kind of ask yourself, I wonder why that is. One is, I don't know whether you recall, but it's when Jesus sends the disciples on ahead to get the room to have the Passover together. And they said, you'll meet a man carrying a jug of water on his head, I think. And you're supposed to say the secret word, and well, it's not a secret word, but you're supposed to go and say something to him, and then he's supposed to take them to the room. Well, because that's in the Gospel of Mark and nowhere else, people have speculated, could the person carrying the jug of water be Mark's dad? Or even Mark himself? And could where they had the Passover be in the house where Mark lived? So it just makes you wonder, brings a little bit of colour. And this picture, I picked a picture from the Good News Bible to maintain decency. But when Jesus went into the garden, if you remember, and was praying, Father, if it's possible, take this cup from me. And the disciples kept falling asleep. Then the crowd came to get Jesus. And it said, a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. So could it be that Mark is the naked man running away? Because the disciples were all having a snore, and they were kind of out of hearing of what Jesus did. So how did they know what Jesus was saying when he was praying, if they were all having a sleep? And you can just kind of see, there's Mark. Maybe he was a young teenager, you never know, because you know what they're like. Took the sheet off his bed, wrapped it around himself and snuck off to see what was going on, and hid behind an olive tree to see what Jesus was doing. And he was watching him, Jesus was praying, and he heard what Jesus prayed, and he saw how Jesus was interacting with Peter, say, come on, get up, sleepyhead. So he was following all this, and then in come the crowd, and they grab him, and he quickly runs away. A night to remember. Just a thought. Brings colour, see, I like colour in the Bible. These are people, these are real people, and sometimes we forget that, and we read them like a boring old text, or like my old physics, text after my A-level, just a boring piece of, well, it's boring. I know Matt loves it. His boyfriend, her fiance. So, we have these things, but then if we go a little bit further into the Bible, we find other little references to a John Mark. Is he the same person? Possibly. I'm not going to declare this as a major revelation. I'm not going to hang my life on the fact that this is really who Mark was who wrote the Gospel. We don't know. But John Mark appears a few times, and I like the story of John Mark, and I just wanted to stop and have a think about John Mark for a minute. Because this John Mark, he had a mother called Mary. We know he met Peter, I think, because when Peter was in the jail, and the jail shook and he was released, he went to Mary's house. That's where he went. So we know that she held her house open for the people to worship him, and new believers. So if there was a young Mark there, he would have met Peter, and that could well have been where John Mark lived. We also know that this John Mark was also the cousin of Barnabas. And there was a time when Barnabas and Paul and John Mark went for a trip together. And we read about it because at some point, John Mark has he goes home. We don't know why he goes home. So of course everyone speculates. Was he homesick? Was he bored? Was he afraid? I mean, let's face it. Spreading the gospel in those times would have been terrifying. I find it terrifying now, and I don't face death. When I was a teenager, I remember doing door knocking, and I used to have my prayer life improved no end. I used to pray, God, let me be out. Let no one be in. Then, recently, in the last couple of years or so, I did healing on the streets, and I began to realise that door knocking was a doddle. I never felt so uncomfortable, so maybe Mark was just feeling totally uncomfortable and went home, he'd had enough. I mean, you wonder how old he was. But he did assist Paul. But I just wanted to just quickly look at that because, yeah, he did assist Paul, and we did have this kind of falling out because then later on, Barnabas and Paul were going to go somewhere, I can't remember where it was, and Barnabas wanted to take Mark, and Paul goes, no, don't want to take him. Yeah. I don't know what word to use, he's a deadbeat, or he's no good for us. And so he refused, and they had a falling out, and they went off. There were several ways. Barnabas went off with John Mark, and Paul went off with Silas, I think it was. But later on, you see, we find other references to John Mark. In 2 Timothy 4, Paul says, only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you because he is helpful to me in my ministry. So I was just thinking, you know what? He may have messed up. He may not have messed up, but he might have messed up. There might have been this falling out, but the point was there was reconciliation. Yeah. And I just think, for me, that was another little story in the middle of trying to do the Gospel of Mark, where it just shows, you know what? It doesn't matter how much messed up you can be, you can still get reconciliation. There's still opportunity for reconciliation. Nothing is impossible in the church, and when we're together as believers, we can overlook things like this. We can work together. And Peter talks about him and says, he calls Mark in Peter 5, he calls Mark his son. I don't think he literally his son, but for him he was a son. And why was he son? Well, because Mark got to know some of the real giants of the day. Whilst Mark himself was never a giant in his own right, he was always the, I don't know what you'd call them, the number 2, the bag carrier. The one that we all need, but most of us don't want to be, because we'd much rather be the number 1. But he served a lot of number 1s. Just trying to remember who they were, because he knew Paul, of course he knew Barnabas, that was his cousin. He knew Paul. Oh, he met Luke when he went to Rome, and of course he met Peter in Rome, which is why Peter sees him as his son. And Peter needed him, because if you think about it, you've got this guy who's obviously, Mark I assume is very educated. I mean, if you've got a Latin name and a Hebrew name, you've got education. And so he could speak Latin. And let's actually put it politely, Peter was a fisherman. Trying to speak in Rome, the Latin they speak, I would imagine he had some difficulty. So Mark came there as a translator, as somebody who could help him do his teaching and get the message out to those in the language that he wasn't familiar with. So Mark knew Peter well. And that's why I think a lot of people have concluded, and I think rightly so, that the Gospel of Mark is actually about, is actually a lot of the same as Peter So I just need to check my slides. I'm sorry, no way. So we know that, some 2,000 years ago, the people in Rome came to Mark and said, we love hearing Peter's tales of what Jesus did. Could you write them down for us? And apparently Peter said, well, you can if you want to. That ringing endorsement as well. You can, but I can't. I don't really care whether you do or don't. If you want to do it. And of course he did it. And through that simple action, 2,000 years later, we're reading the very words of what Peter shared about Jesus. So we have in this Gospel of Mark, this one that's full of action for immediacy. You can see it's coming from Peter. Peter, a man of action, a man of immediacy, this fisherman, who would just say, yeah, well, I was with Jesus, he did this, and then we went over here, we did this, and then he did this, and he did this. You can just kind of hear Peter in the writing, and you get this through. He didn't really care what Jesus said, because he was worried about what Jesus did. We did this, we did this, we did this. And one thing I find very interesting is how, if you think about it, if you go through the Gospel of Mark, you'll see how, if you look at what Peter did in the Gospel of Mark, nowhere does it talk about the good things Peter did. I find it quite fascinating. If you think about it, it tells you about where Peter made a mistake, where he got it wrong. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, but only in John do we read that Jesus reinstated Peter and made him feel good. So, it was also the humility of Peter, constantly saying, I messed up here, I messed up there. Maybe the only thing that he didn't deny was when he confessed who Jesus actually was, which I think is a good tip against Peter's name. And then Peter goes on and tells us how he then had to be rebuked because he didn't want Jesus to die when Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. So what we've got an interesting book that's in the context of a number of Gospels. They're giving us a lovely, rich tapestry of who Jesus is. It comes from different angles. We've got a writer who has an interesting past, it seems. We've got a great story to tell. I was there when Jesus was arrested. I didn't have the clothes on, but I was there. And he knew all the big people, and he was able to write down Peter's stories. And just an aside, if you ever wonder, if you ever read Mark, it's just boom, we're right in the story of Jesus. Here's John the Baptist, off we go. We don't have there were the angels, and there was the wise men, and the camels and donkeys, and there was this, really in, and there he was, because Peter didn't know any about that. If he's talking about his life, he came in when Jesus said, right, come and follow me. And then they're off to see Jesus' cousin in the desert, and off we go on the whole journey. Which is another reason why it's a very strong indication. Actually, these are Mark's writings of Peter's recollections. Basically, an eyewitness account of the reality of what happened. But rather than just keep boring you to death, I thought I'd just finish, well, not finish, but I wanted to talk about, the context. I want to talk about who Mark was. I just thought at the end I'll just do a little overview of Mark, trying not to steal anything from all the insights that Steve will bring us over the next few weeks, and I'll add my little bit every now and again. And I quite like this. This is a drawing by David Paulson because it's geographical, although it doesn't look at, I suppose. But you see, if you look at it from the story of Mark, we start off in the Jordan, because that's where Peter and Jesus met up, and that's where they hung about. One of the lowest points in the world, I think, definitely in Israel. Other than the Dead Sea, you don't really want to meet up in the middle of the Dead Sea. Actually, a very beautiful place. I mean, those people who have been to Israel and have gone to places like the source of the Jordan, it's beautiful. And it's lovely fresh water just gushing out the side of the mountain. It's really quite beautiful. And we have this time period where we go on this journey around Galilee, heading towards Caesarea Philippi, which is getting higher and higher and higher up geographically, basically going up the hill, very, very, very slowly, over a very long period of time. And during that period, we got chapters 1 to 9 of Mark, where he's walking around Galilee, he's healing people, he's ministering to people, he's spreading the gospel, he's telling them the truth. I broke it down the bottom. It was basically in the first 3 chapters, everyone loves him, he's fantastic. The next 3 or 4 chapters, people start to not like him. He gets persecuted because they have arguments over the Sabbath and things like that. So we're going to have a ball when we go through this. And then, of course, towards the end of that section, he starts to gather his disciples and get down to the core nub of teaching, and well, not so much teaching, but doing stuff with them, getting his 12 together. So it's acclamation because they loved him, opposition because they opposed him, and then concentration because he was making sure that he was discipling his disciples together. And then we get to Caesarea Philippi. Now, what happens to Caesarea Philippi? I think it's about chapter 8, is it? I'm not good with numbers sometimes, which is a great confession by an accountant. But they come to Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi, beautiful place, lots of water, hillsides. Very interesting because if you think about this, up until now, if you read this Mark, do you ever notice how they say, "What do you want with me, son of David?" Or, "I know who you are," or, "You healed me, I'm going to go and tell everyone." And Jesus will say, "Nope, stop. You're not to tell anybody this." Quite interesting, isn't it? So for about the first 7 chapters or so, he's saying, "Don't tell anybody, keep quiet about this." I mean, he did really well because then the entire town used to go after him and want to be healed, so obviously they really did obey him. But they didn't really talk about who he was. And then Jesus takes them to Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi was partly named Caesarea Philippi because there was a statue of Caesar at Caesarea Philippi. So, was it the governor of Philippi? It's like the name of the place after him and Caesar. Angling for some fame, but also the goodwill of Caesar. And it's interesting because at Caesarea Philippi there were at least two statues. One was the statue of Caesar, who was a man who people claimed to be God. Also, there was the statue of Pan, who was a god who, according to stories, had become a man. So you had a man thinking he was a god, and a story of a god who thought he was a man. And Jesus just turns to his disciples at this point and says, "Well, who do people say I am?" I say, "Oh, well, some say you are a reincarnated prophet." And he would go, "Like you, or Jeremiah, or whoever." And then, of course, he turns to them and says, "Well, who do you say? Who do you say I am?" And Peter says, "You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God." So we're working towards all this way to this peak. And then right at the peak, they go to this nice high place in the middle of Israel, Mount Hermon. And there we read the story of how Jesus was transfigured before his disciples. So we've come all the way where, don't tell anyone about me, let them come to their own conclusions, all the way to, right, now who do you say I am? Well, we now know you're the Christ, you're the Messiah, you're the promised Son of God. And he goes to transfiguration. At that point, he turns around and says, "Right," like in Luke, it says, he set his face as flint. He said, "Now we're going to head off. We're going to head off because the Son of Man must die." And of course, he'd already warned them enough times in Mark. And all these people who keep telling you he never meant to die, it was an accident. He kept telling them, "I'm going to die, I'm going to die." And if the one way Jesus said, where Peter says to him, "Surely not, Lord," and Jesus says to him, "Get behind me, Satan," if that's not a clue, I don't know what is. And from then on, it's a nice downhill drive off to Golgotha. Because effectively they're going from Hermon down through a place called Perea, which is it's to the right of Israel, it's sort of Jordan way. So it's to the right of the Sea of Galilee, all the way down into Jerusalem. So he has these little interludes. They go for a walk down Perea, because that would take some time, and then we end up in Golgotha. So as a biography, this is not very good, is it? Because if we did Dale Winton's biography, I wouldn't want to have a 16-chapter book about Dale Winton and find that the last chapters 11 and 16 are all about Dale Winton's death. But that's what we get with Mark, and that's what we get with all the Gospels, but particularly with Mark. This strong emphasis on Jesus' death. Resurrection, interesting topic. I might come to that, but we might leave that for the study of the day. So, the point is, he makes this journey. And that takes us through that. So that little diagram is like the book of Mark. So as you start reading the book of Mark, because I'm sure you'll all start reading this now, in readiness, so you can make sure that what Steve says when he does the chapter 1 is true. So you can read through all this now. So that's a little summary of the book of Mark. So, what little things that I liked about the book of Mark? I mean, apart from the fact that it talks about the work of Christ, and 1/3 of that work is about the work he does on the cross, or what he achieves on the cross. But it's interesting how throughout that whole section, Mark is banging out, can you see Jesus' humanity? You know, we have Caesar in Philippi, we've got a son of man, we've got God made man as a human being. And yet we've also got a God who is God. So we're seeing humanity, we're seeing the humanity of Jesus, and we're seeing the divinity of Jesus. So we're seeing in his death, and all this last half of the book of Mark is all about his humanity. The travesty of justice that led to his death. It was, in human terms, it was completely and utterly unjust what he had to endure and what he went through. I'm not going to do that talk again, I'm you're all crying. But, you know, what he had to go through, the price he had to pay. You know, they deliberately were trying to catch him out, and they couldn't. And only by making him all swear an oath, in Jewish terms, did he actually admit to who he was. At which point, in Jewish law, he had to be put to death. But unfortunately, the Romans didn't kill people for claiming to be God. So then they had to twist it all to try to make it look like it was treason. So then the Romans would kill him, even though he hadn't done anything treasonable. So it's totally unjust, this humanity. And yet at the same time, there's a divinity, because he says it at least 3 times, I've come to die. I have come to die. And we all know why he died, because it was God reaching out his arms to you and saying, I'm a holy God, but my son has come to die in your place that you might know reconciliation with me. And maybe one last thought on Mark is it seems to talk a lot about fear and faith. I remember talking once on the storm, and the disciples were sorely afraid. You know, these big butcher fishermen were terrified because they were on a boat that was in the middle of the sea. So that basically tells you how terrifying the storm was to be, because hardened fishermen, you know, getting very upset in a storm, it must have been a bad storm. And Jesus was asleep. And he says, why are you afraid? Don't you have any faith? And I think Mark, there's another little thing that just runs through Mark, you know. Are you afraid, or do you have faith? Maybe something you'll be challenged with right now is, you know, how afraid am I, and how much faith do I have? I know I often find myself asking that very question on Facebook, of all things, because I get afraid to say things that I think are true, because I'm afraid of what people might do to me in writing. And I keep finding myself being challenged. Well, what do I believe? What do I think about Jesus? Should I not be telling the truth? Should I not be exposing the lies of the world? Should we not be going out there and saying, I'm not afraid, because perfect love drives out all fear, and I have a God who is perfect love, and I don't need to be afraid. So anyway, that was just a little run through. Just trying to give you a little flavour of what Mark's about, and then over the next few weeks, we'll still have the outreach Sundays and mission week and things like that. So it won't be every week, but we will over the next few months. We'll just work our way through the Book of Mark, and hopefully you'll start to get more of a flavour of what Jesus did, rather than we said that word, and what it means for us today.
We are Burnham Community Church. You'll find us in Somerset, just 5 minutes from the M5 Junction 22. We meet on Sunday mornings at 10:30 in the St John's Ambulance Hall in Highbridge. Watch our website or follow us on Facebook and look out for our banner. Come along and check us out.